The former vice president is preparing his 2020 kickoff, securing staff and alerting top Democrats he plans to run. But he hasn't made a final decision yet. Washington, the pieces for a Joseph R. Biden Jr. presidential campaign are falling into place. His nucleus of advisors has begun offering campaign positions to seasoned Democratic strategists. They are eyeing a headquarters in Delaware or nearby Philadelphia and a launch date in the beginning of April. Mr. Biden's family is on board, his wife, Jill, enthusiastically so. Mr. Biden has also been privately reaching out to a range of influential Democrats, including party donors, members of Congress and allies in the early primary states, to gauge their support. A pillar of organized labor, the International Association of Firefighters, is prepared to support him in the Democratic primary. And in recent weeks, Mr. Biden's strategist, Steve Ricchetti, has called a handful of would-be candidates and their aides to signal that the former vice president is likely to enter the race, and of late has been telling Democrats that he's 95% committed to running, according to officials directly familiar with the discussions. Yet while Mr. Biden is plainly further along in preparing for a White House bid than he was 4 years ago, when he grudgingly deferred to Hillary Clinton after months of consideration in the aftermath of his son Beau's death, there is still one crucial element that's outstanding: full and final consent from the former vice president himself. This juxtaposition, an eager cadre of supporters laying the groundwork for a campaign they assure is all but certain while the would-be candidate publicly vacillates, has effectively kept the nascent Democratic race on hold. Mr. Biden's decision looms as perhaps the most significant unanswered question of the 2020 contest, and his entry could bring shape to what has been a diffuse Democratic primary, providing voters with a clear front-runner. As a candidate, Mr. Biden would present Democrats with a clear alternative to the hard-charging liberals who now dominate the race and test the appeal of his old-school political profile at a moment the party is hungry for fresh faces but even hungrier to win. "I absolutely believe he's going to run," said Representative Cedric Richmond of Louisiana, who talked to Mr. Biden on the phone earlier this week. "There may still be some doubt in his mind, but there's no doubt in my mind." Mr. Richmond, the former head of the Congressional Black Caucus, said he believes the former vice president is the party's best candidate to beat Trump. Still, in conversations over the phone and strategy sessions in his rented Northern Virginia home that are occasionally interrupted by his German shepherds, Major and Champ, Mr. Biden has acknowledged that he is uncertain about his place in the 2020 Democratic primary. He is also uneasy about potential attacks from rivals on his family, aides and advisors say, namely his son Hunter, a lawyer and lobbyist who went through a high-profile divorce in 2017 and has struggled with substance abuse. And in a soliloquy that was unplanned if not unexpected to Biden advisors, rarely do the garrulous former senator's private views remain private for very long, he openly gave voice to both concerns last week. "I don't think he's likely to stop at anything, whomever he runs against," Mr. Biden said about President Trump, expressing his alarm about putting his family through what would be a very, very, very difficult campaign, without directly mentioning his younger son. And then he mused about not wanting to pursue a fool's errand in an appearance at the University of Delaware. "What I don't want to do is take people's time, effort and commitment without there being a clear shot that I could be the nominee," Mr. Biden explained. While he is leading the field, Mr. Biden is far from an overwhelming favorite and appears to have support from about a third of the Democratic electorate. Senator Bernie Sanders is close behind him, and other prominent candidates, like Senators Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, trail them both. Mr. Biden has spent much of this year running what amounts to the non-incumbents version of a Rose Garden campaign, giving high-profile paid speeches and appearing at events, both in the United States and abroad, that project him as statesman-like. Avoiding Iowa and New Hampshire, and the probing questions that would come in early nominating states, Mr. Biden has instead appeared in Munich, where he spoke about the transatlantic alliance, and in Omaha, where he warned that America's reputation is being tarnished, abroad during an event with former Senator Chuck Hagel, a Republican who was a defense secretary for President Obama. Mr. Biden has already pushed back several self-imposed deadlines for a decision, extending an end of 2018 timeline into January and then into March. One Democrat eager to work for Mr. Biden was told to expect a launch this month, but more recently got word that April was more likely. This dilatory approach has not prompted any softening in Mr. Biden's support. He enjoys a halo-like admiration among many Democrats from his 8 years at the side of former President Obama and leads in initial polls. His ability to remain the early favorite even as other candidates have declared their bids has heartened his advisors, reinforcing their view that the former vice president does not need to rush into the race. People underestimate the intensity of his support and how broad it is, said John Anzalone, who will be Mr. Biden's pollster if he runs. The decision Tuesday by former New York Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg not to run has, in the eyes of Mr. Biden's inner circle, only strengthened their hand by enlarging the vacuum for a left-of-center Democratic candidate who can appeal to voters chiefly focused on defeating Mr. Trump. Mr. Bloomberg's advisors conceded this week that they had concluded Mr. Biden could have been an insurmountable obstacle, recounting with awe the results of focus groups they conducted in which Democratic voters referred unprompted, and admiringly, to Mr. Biden as Uncle Joe.